Hi guys, this is Nick. And like Dave said, we're going to do upgrading System Center Service Manager from 2010 to 2012 in this session. And let me know, by the way, if you're having any issues. Just type into the chat with seeing the presentation or with audio. So we're really going to cover three topics about the upgrade today. Really with the objective of helping you guys understand all the steps involved with all of the options that you have when moving from Service Manager 2010 to 2012, as well as some of the most important questions and considerations that you should have that'll help you make a decision about the best approach for you, and to start to think about some of the implications of the upgrade and take a more holistic view of how that upgrade is going to impact your environment and your users. So to do that, we'll look at the new system requirements for Service Manager 2012 as they compare it to 2010. We'll look at the different upgrade paths, your different options for how you're going to get from a 2010 environment to 2012. And then we'll look at some general considerations when planning for new functionality, because as I'm sure you know, Service Manager 2012 has quite a lot more functionality than 2010 had, especially around service request fulfillment, service level management, the new self-service portal. So we'll talk about some considerations that will help you start to filter some of that new functionality in. So for new system requirements, this chart here helps shows kind of that evolution of software prerequisites from Service Manager 2010 into our current version of 2012, and then some of the additions in 2012 SP1. The big things that I want to really call out here are for the server operating systems. Really, it's the latest version of Windows Server 2008. And as of System Center 2012 SP1, Windows Server 2012 is going to be supported as well. For the client operating systems, this is probably the biggest consideration for most of our customers. Windows XP is no longer supported in Service Manager 2012. You have to have Windows Vista SP2 or later. As well as the Service Manager consoles will no longer install on Windows Server 2003 either. They have to be installed on Windows Server 2008 R2 SP1. So this is the biggest consideration, because if most of your analysts are still on Windows XP, you'll either need to upgrade those client machines to Windows 7, or if you were looking at System Center 2012 SP1, Windows 8, or you'll need to make it available through a remote option like Citrix, or virtualizing the application, or making it available through RDS. And all of those options are possible, but do keep in mind that you do need Windows Server 2008 R2 at least to install the console on. So, you know, we've had some customers who have had Citrix and have used Citrix, but it's on a 2003 infrastructure. So an upgrade could potentially be needed there as well.
Hey Nick, just one comment to make. The portal obviously does change to SharePoint. The old portal goes away, but it's an end-user portal. It's not a full console, so there still is no full web-based console, even in Service Manager 2012. That also catches some people off guard.
Yeah, good point, Pete. Yeah, on that topic of getting folks access to the service desk functionality in Service Manager, it is a rich client, so you will need access to that client, either installed locally or through something like Citrix. But yeah, the self-service portal is still end-user facing. SQL Server versions haven't changed much. It is SQL Server 2008 R2, though. SQL Server 2008 SP1 or SP2 are no longer supported with 2012, and SQL Server 2012 will be supported when Service Pack 1 hits as well. For the portal, the old portal was just sort of static ASP pages, but now it's SharePoint based, and you'll need SharePoint 2010 in order to deploy the SharePoint web parts. But the good news is you can use SharePoint 2010 Foundation. and you'll get all of your service catalog functionality using the free version of SharePoint. What you'll be missing is some of the reporting capabilities you might get in SharePoint. With SharePoint 2010 Enterprise, you get a feature of SharePoint called Performance Point that will allow you to build dashboards and reports on your SharePoint website that can analyze new reporting infrastructure in Service Manager 2012. You don't need Enterprise for that, but for the standard functionality of the portal, service catalog, reviewing requests that you've created, things like that, SharePoint 2010 Foundation is sufficient. Hardware prerequisites have not changed. There's a couple of things that are a bit different, but the large majority of the hardware prerequisites haven't changed, which means that for the most part, if you are going to do an in-place upgrade, you won't need to change a lot of your infrastructure in order to do that. A couple of key differences, though. The data warehouse reporting features. Service Manager 2012 is taking advantage of SQL Server analysis services for its reporting infrastructure. And they have these OLEP cubes that you'll be able to report off of it. I think we've got another webinar in the future around that where we'll talk about that. It's one of the biggest new features, one of the features that I think folks are most excited about with the new product. But that infrastructure requires a significant amount of memory in order to function properly. The system requirements up on TechNet say 8 gigabytes of memory, but our experience has shown us that you really need at least 16 gigabytes of memory on your SQL analysis services server in order to get adequate performance. So a little bit more memory required on the data warehouse reporting infrastructure. The self-service portal, as we said, is now based on SharePoint. As you'll see a little bit later, there's no upgrade path for the portal. The Service Manager 2010 portal simply goes away, will get decommissioned, and then you'll deploy a brand new portal. So new infrastructure, new hardware requirements around proper SharePoint sizing should be utilized there. The only other thing, which isn't on the slides, it's not a huge point for most of our clients, but the Service Manager has been scaled, so it scales to support many more configuration items and more work items per month than Service Manager 2010. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was supported something, I want to say like 100,000 CIs before, and now it's 200,000 or something like that. So it scales a lot higher than it did before, while still, promising adequate performance. But in general, if you've got Service Manager 2010 and you're happy with its performance and you're looking at an upgrade, there isn't going to be a significant amount of change you need to make. So, upgrade paths for Service Manager, there's really two in our mind. There's probably a lot of variation within these two upgrade scenarios, but you really have to choose between an in-place upgrade, upgrading all of your existing Service Manager 2010 components, or a migration. We're going to look at both of those upgrade paths now. So an in-place upgrade, this chart shows if you have a given version of Service Manager 2010, which versions of 2012 you can upgrade to, and what your license status will look like after that. Really the most important thing here is if you're in production with Service Manager 2010, the version you'll need is SP1CU3. You have to have at least Service Manager 2010 SP1CU3 in order to do the in-place upgrade. And if you're in production and supported with your licenses in 2010, you will be after your upgrade to 2012 as well. So this in-place upgrade then, it is a big bang approach. It'll require an upgrade on all server and client components of Service Manager 2010 in order to work. That means servers, the data warehouse, and consoles. There's a new console, and the 2010 consoles don't work on 2012 servers. So you'll have to upgrade all of your components at once in order for the upgrade to work properly. All of your data, the sort of advantage of doing the in-place upgrade is that all of your data and all of your configurations will be retained. User roles, any configurations like custom list values or custom views, templates, all of that will be retained. And most of your customizations will be retained as well. Really, all of the customizations that you've done through management packs will stay, except because the portal doesn't upgrade and must be switched off, and any work you've done on the portal will be lost, and you'll need to sort of recreate that in the new portal. Although, if you're familiar at all with the new Service Manager self-service portal, you're not really recreating functionality from the old portal. It's kind of a different kind of thing. And the other consideration is form customizations. The forms for things like incidents and service, well, there was no service request form, but the forms for things like incidents and change requests have changed a bit. So if you've done any form customization, it's possible that you'll need to fix your form customizations because fields have moved around a bit. They'll survive the upgrade. They just may not look very nice anymore after you've done it because the forms have rearranged slightly. The rest of your customizations will be fine. Any class extensions you've done to add custom properties, any custom reports will still work. The data warehouse schema didn't change, it was just expanded to, so all of your custom reports will still function. Any tasks or workflows you've implemented, all of that will survive the upgrade.
Say, Nick, on the form customizations, is there any quick and easy way to identify the ones you've made so you can go back and check and fix those?
Yeah, your form customizations will all be stored in a single management pack. You can only have one form customization management pack per form. So it's a good idea to go back to that and open that up in the authoring tool where you've probably made those customizations so you're familiar with what changes are going to be made. And that way you'll know specifically what to look for after you've run the upgrade to see if you'll need to make any changes after you do some, your testing after the upgrade's done. Another sort of preparatory task that you could do that might save you some time. There's a Service Manager 2012 authoring tool. It's a newer version of the 2010 authoring tool. And it may be worth rebuilding those form customizations ahead of time. So that way, when you run the upgrade, if you do find that you need to move a field or anything like that, you can have it pre-built, and then it's as easy as importing a new management pack as opposed to having to scramble to rebuild the form customization at that time. One of the other considerations we'll talk about a little bit later too is whether or not you need those customizations anymore. We did a lot of customization in the 2010 days to facilitate things like service level management, to keep track of service requests separately from incidents. And you may not need those anymore because the Service Manager 2012 functionality has filled a lot of those gaps. So some of those things you may even just decide to leave behind. So this is a very generic sort of process for doing an in-place upgrade. And there's obviously a lot of detail and nuance in each one of these major steps. But these are kind of the critical pieces that you'll need to go through in order to successfully do an in-place upgrade. The very first one, planning the upgrade and new functionality, is definitely the most important step. And it kind of goes without saying that you need to plan these things out. But you really do, and you need to plan it on a couple of different levels. If you're going to be implementing any new functionality at Cutover, you obviously need to plan your design and your build of that new functionality. If you're going to introduce service requests, or if you're going to configure the self-service portal that's new with 2012, you'll need to make sure that all of that has been thought out well enough in advance of actually doing the upgrade. And there's also planning on the actual technical side with the upgrade itself. You want to make sure you've got a robust, validated backup plan that you know that because it is a big bang upgrade, you know that if there is an issue, if your upgrade fails, you've got a reliable way of moving back to your 2010 version so you can give it a second go. And that you know specifically what that is. The devil really is in the details with the planning for this, because it is kind of the cutover for an in-place upgrade is kind of an event, and it's one that really needs to be planned for and very well thought out to quite a lot of level of detail, and so you don't miss those small details that if enough of those small errors occur. They can add up to a big enough of a problem that you really do need to roll back, and you want to make sure that you can do that. So planning is really paramount here. Once that's been done and you've picked a date and you've done all of your planning and your documentation and you're ready to go, the upgrade process is pretty straightforward. You'll want to disable production access so people aren't in changing things. Do all of your backups. After you've done disabled production access again, so if there is a rollback, you haven't lost new incidents getting created through email or anything like that. You back up your databases, back up management packs, we advocate, snapshot VMs, whatever you need to do. Then you'll run the actual upgrades. There is an order, and there's an upgrade guide on TechNet that goes through the specific steps involved with doing the actual upgrade. But you'll upgrade your server components. Once that's been done, you can upgrade your console components. All of your consoles will need to be upgraded to the newer version. And then sort of optionally, you can deploy the self-service portal at that point. If you're going to use the portal, that would come last in this step here in terms of your installs. We probably might advocate, simplicity with your first deployment of the portal, especially if you're doing an in-place upgrade and you've got a finite amount of time, to do this. We would advocate something that's as simple as possible, that maybe just replicates what you had in 2010, the ability to create an incident or a service request from the portal. That deployment will happen after your server and console upgrades have happened. And then at that point, you've got the ability to add any new functionality that you might need to add. So if you're going to flip off the legacy service level functionality and start using the new service level management capability in Service Manager, if you are going to configure that self-service portal, many folks will start using service requests immediately. And you may need email notifications and list values and views, additional user roles created around these. Once all of that's done, it's time to add that new functionality. And then, of course, at the very end, testing. And we advocate, again, there's different kinds of testing that you can do here, but you want to be pretty thorough with your testing. I'd say what's key to having a good, worthwhile test phase with this upgrade is documentation. Making sure that your existing environment is documented well enough that you've got a baseline to test against. So you know exactly what notifications should fire, when they should fire. You know what views should exist. You know what should happen when you click all of the buttons. And if you've got that baseline, then it's fairly straightforward to go through and do sufficient amount of testing.
Hey Nick, I just wanted to jump in and comment, because we've seen this, and maybe you'll want to explain a little bit, but what we've seen some customers do is when they want to do an in-place upgrade, they will actually replicate their 2010 environment in a lab and then run the upgrade on that 2010 lab environment to essentially stage the whole thing so that they can plan not only for the rollback if they need to do it, but they can also then work the functionality out in the lab. Of course, they then have to be able to do that whole thing over again in production when they do the in-place upgrade.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. There's Travis Wright wrote a blog post explaining how to do that, how to replicate a service manager environment into a lab environment. And I think what we'll do is include the link to that blog post in the YouTube video that gets posted with this video in it, so you guys can check that out and see what's involved there. But it's definitely a good idea, especially if you are considering adding new functionality. You're going to need a Service Manager 2012 lab to do that. And like Pete mentioned, it gives you the added benefit of being able to test your rollback plans and things like that. So kind of wrap this together then for the in-place upgrade path, pros and cons. Really the primary reason why you might choose the in-place upgrade paths is because you'll maintain all of your data, your configurations, and just about all of your customizations in your existing production environment. There's no loss of any data or configurations, and clearly you won't have to manage any kind of data in two systems going forward. So it allows you to keep things fairly simple in that way. in terms of your infrastructure. And the second thing, of course, is that it uses your existing infrastructure. Now, while it's absolutely a good idea and the right thing to do to have a 2012 lab environment if you're going to be adding new functionality, you know, in purely technical terms, you don't need any additional infrastructure when you're going to do the Inplace upgrade, which helps. There are some cons, though, and we do want to call these out because primary to these is the limited upgrade window. I think the biggest disadvantage to this path is it's going to cause downtime. You're going to have to shut down production access. And if you are a 24/7 service desk, that may present some issues for you. And you've got a limited window in order to get everything upgraded, new functionality added, and everything tested, while still leaving enough time at the end of all of that for a rollback if you need to. So you really have a fairly limited window, and it kind of adds to the importance of the planning for doing this, because you've only got, if you're going to do it in an evening, you've got an evening. It's probably an unrealistic amount of time. If you're going to do it over a weekend, that's a little bit better, but even so, you have to make sure you leave enough time in for a rollback, enough time to test your rollback, and make sure that everything's back the way it was. So it puts a lot of pressure on getting the upgrade done during that window. Which really takes us to that second point there. You need to have a verified backout plan. And by verified, we mean tested. It's somewhat safe to assume that if you restore your database backups and roll back to your snapshots and your VMs, that things will work. But we definitely advocate going through those motions in a lab environment. One that, like Pete said, you could duplicate from your production environment. But we definitely advocate going through that process and making sure that it's successful and that you understand all of the steps and the order of those steps that are involved. And the last bullet there, which is really related to the first bullet in the cons, is that it's difficult to add new functionality, partly because you only have so much time to add new things in over a weekend, but also because users will need to be trained on the new functionality that needs to be added. There needs to be awareness and readiness of these new features and things. And that's difficult to do when folks go home on Friday and come in Monday with a new system. It is possible to train in a lab environment, and we've done that, and that works well to get people ready. So there is some planning that you can do, and there's some things you can do to get around that fact, but it does make it a bit more difficult to get new functionality in at cutover. Of course, you can always do your upgrade to Service Manager 2012 and then add new functionality after the fact. And that is one of the other advantages that is sort of omitted here. All of the legacy functionality in 2010 still works in 2012. So you can run an Inplace upgrade, with the exception of the portal, that is. You can run an Inplace upgrade and have no significant difference to your users. Your analysts who are in System Center Service Manager every day, other than the console having a slightly different color scheme, it's absolutely possible to do that and leave out any new functionality, and that's not a bad strategy. But if you do intend on adding new functionality, you may run into some issues just with timing. So our second upgrade path then is migration. We call it migration. And this is really just similar approach to any kind of migration to a new tool. You know, every time we implement Service Manager, we're usually migrating from something like Heat or Remedy or Trackit or whatever. And it's really following that kind of process. You build a brand new environment. You can duplicate your Service Manager 2010 functionality because 2012 is backwards compatible with all of your 2010 configurations. And then you can configure all of your new configurations, your new customizations, build out your portal, and then have a cutover as opposed to an upgrade. One of the disadvantages we'll see later is the loss of historical data. It is possible, though, to migrate data from your existing 2010 environment to a brand new 2012 environment. It's also possible to just not migrate it and have your historical environment in a separate system, like you might have done when you migrated to 2010 in the first place. But data can be migrated using CSV imports and some other methods, so it's not something that you can't get around. Upgrade path here. Again, this is very generic, and there's a lot of detail and nuance that can sort of change here from company to company. But really what we like to do is migrate all of your 2010 functionality to a brand new 2012 environment. We'll design, build, and test all of the new functionality, just like we might do if we were migrating from a non-System Center tool. And then once we're happy with the functionality, you would upgrade all of the Service Manager 2010 consoles and send out the name of the new server that everyone's going to connect to and have your cutover to the new system. So in terms of planning, there's certainly a lot more flexibility and capability here for cutover. Cutover is a little bit less intensive here. And I'll go to the next slide. There are still some cons here that we'll call out. So again, greater scheduling flexibility. Your cutover process is much less concentrated. It's not an event that needs to occur over a weekend now. It's something that you can build up to. You have a lot more time to do testing because all of that can be done ahead of your cutover. And therefore, it's much lower risk. And because you've got the added scheduling flexibility and the extra time, it's much easier to implement new functionality because you're implementing it into production, and you can get all of your testing over with before you've committed to cutover. The cons then are essentially this. Legacy data is not automatically available. All of your historical data that's been groomed out of the console and is only in the data warehouse, that's not going to automatically be available. Like we said, it is possible to migrate that data into Service Manager 2012 into your new environment. It's not a trivial process to do that. It's a significant amount of work and planning and effort and requires some lead time and testing. But it is possible to get, I'd say, the majority of your legacy data from your old system into your new system, but it isn't 100% foolproof. So that is one of the cons. And the second is, of course, it requires additional server resources. At least twice as many servers because you're duplicating a production environment, and usually more because we like having development environments and lab environments to test things out before we move them into production. So it can be quite a lot more in terms of infrastructure resources. So some planning considerations then. I don't think necessarily narrowed everything down into these 4 questions, but I think these 4 questions probably hit the most salient points when you're planning your upgrades and figuring out what approach you're going to take. First, do you have a plan? And I think that is going to be the most important thing, and that's why we put it first here. And there's a lot to plan. First, your upgrade objectives. Why are you doing the upgrade? Is there a particular piece of functionality that you want to take advantage of? Is it simply just because the new version of the product's out and it seems like time to upgrade, which is a totally valid reason? But if there is a specific objective for the upgrade, then clearly that needs to become part of your upgrade process because you want to make sure that you're unlocking those new features or getting those new benefits that you expected from doing the upgrade. Then there's the upgrade planning itself, which we talked about is extremely important, especially if you're doing an in-place upgrade. And with your in-place upgrade, what's at least as important is your rollback plan. That you know if you do run into an issue, that you've got a cutoff time. Like if you're going to start your upgrade on a Friday night and it needs to be there by Monday morning, maybe you say if it's not working by Sunday at noon, then we're going to roll back because that's how much time it takes to do the rollback and test that everything's working. And again, we highly recommend that you validate your rollback procedure, that you've tested it, and that you're confident that it works. And of course, the test plan. And this goes back to the point I made earlier about documentation. You have to have a baseline to test against. And once you upgrade your production environment, your physical baseline goes away because the upgrade's been done and your baseline's gone. So documentation is really the most important thing there. And knowing all of the things that you're going to test, how you're going to test them, and that you've got the documentation to test them against, having all of that ahead of time. Because again, it's a very time-sensitive thing. you really need to concentrate that over your downtime window for this upgrade. So, second consideration then, if and how do you plan on maintaining your legacy data? And you've really got two options. One system, and if your intention is to be able to maintain everything in the single system, then an in-place upgrade is probably the best option. Or if you're okay with leaving things in two systems, which we appreciate that many folks are, and especially since a lot of you have migrated to Service Manager 2010 fairly recently. The project hasn't been out that long. And you may already be maintaining data in two systems now because you've got some data in 2010 and some in your legacy system. And now you'll have three tools that you need to maintain it in, and that's not ideal. But if it is a situation that you can live with, then the migration path might be the way for you to go. What new features do you plan on implementing? And we've listed the big ones here: service requests, the new portal, service level management and release management, and the cube reporting is another one that's not on this list. I think those are probably the biggest new features. So which of those are important to you? Which of those do you plan on implementing at cutover? Which of those can wait until after cutover? And again, this will lend itself to one upgrade path over another. If you're really just interested in getting to the new version, you're not looking at a lot of new features, plus you want to maintain all of your data in the same system, you've got a really strong case to go for the in-place upgrade. And by the way, I don't want to give you guys the impression that an in-place upgrade is I don't know, not that it's dangerous, but that it's a much higher risk approach. We just know that it requires, I would say, significantly more planning. But if you've done the proper amount of planning, you're prepared to do the upgrade, then I think it's absolutely a viable approach. I think that we've been a little bit too harsh on the in-place upgrade plan here, and if that was the path you were considering, I think it's totally viable. I just think you want to keep these considerations in mind when you're making that decision.
What do you think, Nick, the difference is in terms of timing for planning? Is it a 2-to-1 ratio? Is it just kind of give us a feel? Well,
it's probably not that so much. I think the planning shifts. I think if you're going to do a migration, the cutover becomes more of a non-event. It really is. They connect to a different server the next day. So the cutover itself is not necessarily as much of an event, which means you can divert a lot of that planning time to what new functionality you're going to enable, which might be higher or better value-adding tasks that you can complete. So I don't necessarily think it ends up being less planning, because if you're not planning everything around this concentrated event of a cutover, you can take that time and plan new functionality and decide what your service catalog is going to look like and maybe build some cube reports and things like that. But the cutover becomes much less significant in a migration. Okay. And the last question, go ahead. No. And then the last question here is just, is your organization ready? And on all of your different fronts, are your analysts who are using the tool ready? Have they been, especially if you're adding new functionality, have they been trained on the new functionality? Is there any kind of training or maybe not, maybe just communication that needs to go out to end users, that the portal is going to look different, that when they create requests, they're not going to just be creating generic requests anymore. They might have a bit of a catalog, even if it's a simple one to choose from, and maybe you go as far to do some formal training to your end users on how to navigate the new portal. The system administrators are certainly going to need some readiness. There's more to manage in the tool. I think we often talk about Service Manager as being almost twice as big in terms of its functionality as 2010, which from an administrator point of view means that there's twice as many knobs to turn. And then your stakeholders, the folks championing this cause, are they aware of the changes that are going to be making? Are you meeting with your functionality the objectives that you set out for your upgrade in the first place? And that tends to be one of the things I think gets pushed to the end. Like in most projects, training is one of those things that tends to get pushed and pushed until there just isn't any time left for it. Well, I don't want to say that it's as important as getting the functionality right and making sure that you've met all of your requirements. I also don't want to discount it, and I think it's worth asking that. This also gets back to the point about what upgrade path you choose, because like I said before, if you do an in-place upgrade, it doesn't have to, but it can make training opportunities a little bit more difficult, because you'll need to have a 2012 test environment to train out of, and if you don't have that, then it'll be very difficult to train on new 2012 functionality until it actually exists. So that's really all we wanted to cover today. Hopefully that gives you guys a little bit of an idea of the kinds of questions that you should ask yourself when you're thinking about doing an upgrade, and what approach makes sense for you. And a lot of those questions may already be answered, but hopefully that helps you understand a little bit better the timing and your options. So does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, feel free to pop your mute off and ask if you've got questions. I just want to ask a generic question. Nick, in your experience, what's like the top 1, 2, or 3 things that you have gone wrong that you'd look for people to avoid? I'm trying to look for the top issues to avoid, and also what's the top 1, 2, or 3 things that are make sure you do besides what you've mentioned here?
Sure. Yeah, definitely the number one thing I think is to not underestimate the importance of planning and preparation, especially with the in-place upgrade. We've been fortunate to not have to run into issues where lack of planning has caused a problem for us. We've been fortunate to have planned sufficiently and have worked with clients who have contributed to that planning. But that's probably the number one thing. If you go to do your in-place upgrade, you realize that it is going to fail and you need to roll back, and your rollback fails, the likelihood of that happening is somewhat minimal. But if your rollback does fail, it's probably because there wasn't sufficient amount of testing and planning that's gone into it. So I think that's the number one thing to reducing the impact on the business when you're doing this. I think some of the other considerations, I think the cutover, I called it a non-event when I was talking about the migration. It really is not a non-event. It is an event. It is something that is going to cause some impact, and I think understanding what organizational impact that's going to have is important. That kind of gets back to training. You know, if you're throwing a bunch of new functionality out there, I think it's important to make sure that there's some communication around that. There's a bit of a tendency that we've seen to add a lot of new functionality and then drop it on users. And while in certain organizations that's okay because they're flexible and dynamic enough to handle those kinds of things, I do think that it warrants at least consideration to say, you know, do we have time, or should we make it a priority to not necessarily do formal training, but to communicate properly enough so people know what to expect. So yeah, I think those are the biggest things.
Okay, thanks. Do we have other questions from the group? Question from Vanessa is, do you have a list of items that are recommended to be documented before the upgrade?
Yeah. What we'll document when we do an upgrade is we'll do a couple of things. We'll get counts of data. So we'll see how many incidents, how many of each work item exist, how many of each kind of configuration item exists at a broad level. Like we won't look at we'll look at basically number of users, number of computers, software, and then each kind of work item. And we might go to some additional levels of detail depending on their volume. If they've got thousands of incidents in the system, we might look at break them down by status, so we can make sure that the data integrity is there after the upgrade. So that's data. The other thing we'll look at is their management packs. We'll document all the management packs that exist and make sure that those are all there and healthy after the upgrade. And then the last is configurations and customizations. So we'll mostly just do screenshots, but we'll screenshot list values, views, subscriptions, templates, all of the different configurations that can be made in the system. Oh, and connectors as well. And we'll document all of that mostly with screenshots, because I think that's probably the quickest way to get your data together. And that's really, I think, enough. And what that will do is it'll give you enough of a baseline that you can go back after you've done the upgrade, make sure that your data counts match, make sure that your views are still displaying the right data, the data that they're supposed to display. It's not, by the way, what we wouldn't expect to see is that you've got 30 email subscriptions before you do the upgrade, and after you do the upgrade there's 15. What we want to make sure is that the configurations are still right, so that your assigned to user notifications are still emailing the assigned to user when they're supposed to. And so it's that kind of thing that we try to document ahead of time. And we're also sensitive that, I don't know, it's probably not appropriate to ever talk about going overboard with testing because it's important, but we're also sensitive that there is only so much time to do it, and there's a right amount of testing to do. And I think that right amount of testing helps drive how much documentation you do ahead of your upgrade.
Chad has a question. Is there a migration checklist to follow?
Yeah, I think we've got probably not formalized. I think that's probably something that we should develop and make available out there for folks. I think we could certainly talk about the things that are important in terms of migrating your functionality from one system to another. There's the order of your functionality migration from one system to another is really important as well. So I don't think we have anything formalized around that, but that's something that's definitely worth putting together, I think, and making available. So.
Awesome, thanks. And if there's further questions, you can always send a note to info@acceleres.com. We'll make sure we answer them. This recording and the recording of past events and future events will be available up on our YouTube channel, so just youtube.com/Acceleres, or just search on Acceleres YouTube and you'll find it. So thanks for joining us today. We've got another session coming up next month. I believe we're covering some orchestrator topics, so look forward to seeing you there. Thanks very much, Nick, for your presentation.
All right, great. Thank you very much, guys.